Hi everyone! Welcome to Geek Space TV. I was just doing that thing where you retweet the tweets. I've heard that's where the term retweet comes from. You do it again. You redo the original thing. Hi everyone! Thank you so much for joining me today. If you're new here, welcome to Geek Space TV. We are a non-profit broadcasting studio based in Seattle, and I am very excited to be here. We've got another episode of Behind the Screens where we talk about playing and running tabletop RPGs. This is a good opportunity for you to ask me questions about RPGs. I can impart my many years of experience in this field. But also we can solicit some feedback and comments and thoughts from chat and the community about issues that you're having. Today I'm hoping to focus, but obviously I use the term focus lightly, loosely, without a lot of hope that it shall remain, to talk about improvising when it comes to RPGs, making stuff up on the fly. I like exclamation point Rails came in right at that time, which I feel like is a super, super reasonable thing to talk about, the having or not having of said Rails. Actually, that's a whole separate topic, which I came up with like multiple points, and I'm like, ooh, that's a good YouTube video topic, but I need one more strategy because you need three. You can't just do like, here's 2 things you can do. I need to have like, here's 3 things that you can do, but that's just me. So hello Paladin and Iffy and Grimloss and I was gonna say Night Witch, but no, Crit Witch, OMG Ponies, or Pacific Northwest Eyes.
No.
Pacific Northwest
OMG
Eyes. No, I know, but I guess PWN, Pacific West North.
Killed me, right?
Sorry. Hi, Pep Chase. I played some Dragon Age earlier. Yep, that's true. It's a true statement. But what I did earlier today, I also took a cat to the vet. So all in all, productive. Like things really, like advice comes in threes, right? You're like, you don't give people 2 strategies of things to do. You give people like 3 strategies of things for people to do, I guess. I actually, Paladin, surprisingly, I have used pre-generated modules. I know that may blow some people's minds, and so I'll talk a little bit about how I used pre-gen modules in combination with doing improv, and how all of those things can kind of blend together. Yeah, 3 to 5 choices. In this sense, like 3 to 5 pieces of advice. So anyway, I'll put together some pieces on that. I do want to remind you of ways that you can support us here if you are interested or able to do so. As a reminder, we'll be talking a little bit about changes that we're making to Seed and Spark and fundraising in Wind Down, which will be happening after this show, so in about an hour and a half. So stay tuned for that. We will answer all of those questions, but you can support us in several main ways. You can head over to Patreon, support us over there with a regular monthly donation, which is super awesome, and we really, truly, truly appreciate it. There's some sweet rewards, and Anna has a super cool looking spreadsheet that's coming together. She's laughing, but I don't think she understands how much I like spreadsheets.
I'll give you a tour later.
Oh, please do. I love spreadsheets. Then we also have, you can also support us through direct donations. Any that come through, I will read out because I can see the lovely messages that come with them over here in chat. And then you can also support us non-financially. You can share our stream, talk about it in tweets, pass it around to various people in your social media networks or in person, word of mouth. Do I say excel at them? Oh. This is not my stream, but I would consider rewarding you for that. Consider it. I would consider it. So yeah, there's like fancy nested data pages, right? Ugh, so good. So good.
I used pivot tables.
Pivot tables! Pivot that data.
That's what he's talking about.
Yeah. So, thank you so much, everybody, for being here. There was talk of buying me a spreadsheet with a duvet on it. That would have been cool. Thank you. A duvet? Yes, a duvet. Thank you so much, AzTechnology21, for that resubscription. Thank you. So, you make a lot of debatably useful spreadsheets. Right? Sometimes I'm like, should these be combined spreadsheets or should they remain as one singular spreadsheet? It's a conundrum. It's a conundrum, really. How you approach your spreadsheet construction, what levels of spreadsheet nesting and layering do you do? I know. I love subfolders. I'm very into folders. I like just strategies of organizations. I went to the Container Store the other day and I was like, nah, I could just live here forever. It's great. You plan all your RPG's characters out to level cap. Nice, nice. Actually, spreadsheets are genuinely a useful thing in the context of RPGs. You can use them for character planning. You can also use them for campaign planning. I do recommend, weirdly enough, for things like RPGs to maybe... Here's like a complete aside to the main topic of today, so I'm not at all surprised that this is what I'm talking about first. Managing your materials is genuinely a thing that is important in GMing, but also as a player. One of the things that I have noticed is kind of helpful to have is utilizing cloud storage for a lot of your RPG information. So for me, I try and keep, because I have a computer and a laptop and a phone, right? I'm gonna sometimes be planning on the fly. I'm gonna be like, oh shoot, I've got like a bunch of downtime here and I'm gonna just do some planning or make some notes. Having easy access to a lot of your information is really helpful to have. So being able to put it onto, we'll get to the main topic in an hour. Being able to have access to all of your information is really helpful. So keeping cloud storage information, so like using Google Sheets and using Google Docs and stuff like that, or whatever your preferred storage is, can be a helpful thing for planning and running RPGs, keeping maps and stuff. It's also a good way to share information with your players. I keep sourcebook PDFs so that I can access them both on my phone and also on my computer, so I never have to worry about being on a device that doesn't have the materials that I need. It's genuinely a very useful thing to have. You can also, one of the shortcuts that I have used for when I am at a table, and like when I'm playing the game and I don't want to have my laptop out, but I don't necessarily want to print stat blocks because I'm not sure exactly what monsters we're going to use, and I've got like 3 or 4 to pick from, I will take a picture of the stat block on my phone, and then I can easily swipe over and just access whichever ones that I need, and I'll like keep them on Google Drive. That was something that I did when I had a lot of potential blocks that they might be using, and I didn't want to print out sheets for all of them. Ways to manage your materials. I keep a separate folder for each one of the shows that I do, and all of that has the information in it for each show. It's got each episode, it's got all of the like reference sheets and stuff like that, so every show has a different one. For characters, I've run into some issues because I don't fill up a full notebook with an individual character, and sometimes I'm running through a lot of them. So now I've gone to a single notebook for like one-shot characters, or I'll make those notes just on the character sheet. And then if it's like a long-term campaign, then I'll have a specific notebook for that character. And Paladin, thank you so much for donating. Just doing my part because y'all Geek Space TV peeps be cool. Thank you. Appreciate that. So now that I've gone off on my tangent about document organization, feel free to ask me organization-related questions. I do have a lot of opinions about that, because I think there's a lot of different ways that you can organize your materials that are more or less effective. Okay. We're going to talk about improv. It's like, any other tangents you want to send me on? Feel free to ask me questions. I'm going to keep improvising this. Yeah, I am improvising this episode about improvising in RPGs. As some reminders, if you put either my name or the word question somewhere in what you are writing, it will highlight it for me in chat, so I am better able to see it and therefore respond to it in a meaningful way. Are piles of paper around your desk effective? Maybe they are for you. They are not for me. They're stressful for me. Or are they organized piles? That's an important question. Do the piles have some semblance of organization to them or not? OneNote. Yeah, no, actually OneNote is really a really helpful tool. So I've used OneNote, less so for RPG planning, but OneNote simulates notebooks in a kind of really nice way. So you can have a notebook, and then you can have tabs, or you can have sections, and then those sections can have separate pages, and you can like almost infinitely nest your notebooks in OneNote. I like nesting. One note, one kill. That's the actual tagline for Death Note. Yeah, OneNote is a really useful tool. It's also one that you can sync to online to be available. Like it'll store your notebooks in the cloud. And because it's mirroring a little bit more of a notebook, you're less constrained in terms of where you put things on the page. So OneNote is definitely a digital tool I recommend. I know, Anna, you talked about using Trello. Some people like to use Trello for planning. I don't think it's probably not the best one for like a lot of storing of information, but it's a good one for coming up with ideas and to-do listing. I think of some other tools. Google Docs is a good one. I like that one because I can share it with my players. So I've made glossaries that I can access and that my players can also see. Hi, Noonday. So the things like glossaries. Things like glossaries or player resources are extra good to have as cloud stuff. So we do a lot of, I'll make a document, I'll share it with the cast, and then like it gets pinned in whatever appropriate Discord channel it is that we have, which is a really like a useful way of sharing information that I can also then update as we're adding things to it. The trick that I've run into is I will sometimes I will have information that's part of the glossary that my players don't know yet. So I have sometimes just had 2 glossaries, which is sort of silly. So I don't have a great strategy around like redacted information or stuff that they are not currently privy to. But if anyone has other recommendations for digital and or possibly pen or paper tools that they utilize in RPGs, feel free to share them. Get back to the topic. The topic at hand that I haven't talked about yet at all. So when it comes to improvising in RPGs, it's a pretty broad category. And it kind of covers a whole lot of different things. You can think about it improvising as is functionally any time you have to do things on the fly. You're making something up or creating something that you haven't yet planned. And that's what you're doing. That's what I mean when I'm talking about improvising. And that can be anything from creating NPCs to encounters to monsters to plot hooks to literally potentially anything in a game. Because one of the things about an RPG is maybe less so than in a strict improv show, but there's functionally, technically, almost no limitations, right? Like the players can be like, we're going to go to the next village over. And you're like, well, yeah, I did not plan the next village over. And so there isn't necessarily anything that can stop them. You could choose to stop them, and we'll get into that's a related but slightly different topic about getting players to do the things that you want, which is sometimes viewed as a negative, but I think is also an important skill to know how to do it in order to know when to do it. And yeah, what Palin is saying, I definitely agree with, that pretty much every campaign is going to have some portions that are improvised and some portions that are planned, and everybody is going to find that they sit comfortably on a scale. That some people are going to be like, almost fully down this improvised, and their level of planning is like 3 words. And other people are going to be like, no, I have all my stat blocks, I have a map, I have everything of this area detailed and sorted. And it's really it's a level. Finding out where you fit on that spectrum is really, sometimes it might depend on your campaign, it might depend on your familiarity with the system, it might depend on your group of players. Be Right UK, thank you so much for the donation. Thank you. There's no message. So the message is, you're all great, thank you for being here. Followed by that face. That was part of the message. I couldn't convey it in words to you. It was, in asterisks, Lauren holds her mouth open and looks at the camera. Save the world, right? That could be your level of planning. Thank you so much, Be Right. I'm going to sip my coffee. So there isn't inherently, people might want to make you feel bad for using a particular technique in an RPG. Screw them. There isn't anything wrong or right about how much improv you do. But being prepared to do some of it is a good skill set to have, because it is unlikely that you can plan for everything. And I genuinely wouldn't recommend that, because you will either, unless your players are really prepared to follow a very strict narrative and do exactly what you expect them to do, and you want to sort of really make that happen, I suspect it leads to a slightly less pleasant game experience. But I think there are some people that might not feel that way. Alternatively, if you try and account for every possible thing that the players could do, you're going to potentially give yourself a lot of work you may or may not want to do. But it's a spectrum, and there isn't necessarily right or wrong things to do it. And like Alyssa said, like others have said, there's a whole host of things that you might run into improvising on a lot of different scales. And yeah, I have improvised game mechanics. Sometimes players will ask to do things that you don't know how they're supposed to do it. William TW, thank you for the donation of $5.31. Hey, I need tips on improvising because I've been unable to improvise a donation message. I may need sleep too. Go to sleep. It's my tip on improvising. Go to sleep. Well done. So, feel free if you have any specific questions related to improvising content, please let me know. Otherwise, I will just kind of wax poetic on this particular topic and then go on a lot of tangents as chat brings up questions. So yeah, the core of improvising is make things up as they go along. And that, there's a lot of ways to do that. Well, let me see. Think about some of the things that people kind of talk about. Corpsmith was an excellent example of a game that had no rules. I think Dan also ran one. I think his Fiasco game. No. Did he run a game that had no rules? Was he the one who ran Fiasco? I feel like it was him. And I feel like that game didn't really have any rules. Or maybe Claudia ran it. I'm uncertain. I can't remember. But I want to say Dan ran something that had almost no rules.
Dan ran something that had no rules. Claudia ran Fiasco.
Cool. Okay. Then I'm getting those two things mixed together, but they were two things that did happen. Excellent. Excellent. So, one of the first things that people talk about with improv, and this is something that is still relevant for RPGs, but with some, I mean, it's relevant in improv and it still has caveats in improv, but in RPGs you need to sometimes take it in a little bit of a different way. Hi, Space Pirate Games. Too late for sleep. I can't help you then, William. I don't know what to do. I told you my suggestion, and that was to go to sleep. That was to go to sleep. That's right, an untitled one-shot, and that's what it remains. Its title was Untitled. It's alternating between fluids. The spotlight's happening, and I enjoy this. I don't know how well people can see it, but it's right here. It's right here. We talked about my favorite style. We've talked about it a little bit. I tend to err further on the side of improvising as a GM. And some of that is by necessity for me. I'm at a point where like running a game, one game every week takes a chunk of time. Running multiple games every week takes more time, almost twice as much, weirdly enough. And there were points where I've done 3. I think once I did 4 in 1 week. No, I'm not sure I quite did that many, but I think I did because it was like 2 regular episodes. maybe it was even 3 regular episodes in a one-shot. It was a lot. I've run a lot of RPGs. And by necessity, I have a limited amount of time, which means that essentially you can save time and planning by improvising as you go. And that is something that I have developed a technique for. Now, the amount that I am comfortable improvising is often very, very dependent on how well I know a system. And I will say that the better you know a set of rules, the more the more able or the more comfortable at least I am with coming up with stuff on the fly. For example, at this point, Cypher system is relatively simple when it comes to just the number of rules, and creating an NPC, creating a monster or creature or something that players have to face in Cypher is literally coming up with one number. That's it. You base the entire thing off of a single number. And from there, you can make things go up or down a little bit if you want to, but functionally you can create an NPC off of a single number. And that number is their difficulty. So how difficult is this monster to face? And that is a number between 1 and 10. And yeah, so we'll make one now. So you're fighting a monster. This monster is difficulty level 2. That means it deals 2 points of damage and it has 6 health. And then I can decide, do I want it to have armor? This one, it's kind of tough. It has 1 point of armor, and maybe it has a special ability. Probably not if it's a level 2 creature. We made a monster. And so like that's a level of comfort that I have with a system. By the time I was like 6 months into running Shadowrun, I was relatively comfortable with it. So I could say, for example, I need to make they're facing a guard, and they're pretty low level. They're not particularly interesting. They're not a mage. They're just someone. I'm like, what weapon do they use? Is it melee or ranged? And I had a bunch of, and so I'm like, okay, it's this. What's the damage on the weapon? It's this. What's their pool for something that they're good at? This is how many dice they roll. Something that they're not so good at, this is how many dice they roll. What's their soak? And so I could come up with those numbers largely on the fly because I was pretty familiar with how the system worked. And so for me, creating those numbers and just pulling them was relatively simple. So comfort with a system, if you're like, I'm having a really hard time improvising, one of the factors, especially when it comes to like NPCs, monsters, or sort of those types of encounters, like difficulty, a lot of that will come down to how familiar you are with the system. So give yourself time, give yourself practice using that set of rules. I plan a lot more for the first episode in a particular system than I do for the 20th episode in a particular system. Because one, I often have resources to pull from. So I just had standard blocks of stats that I could pull for guards in Shadowrun that I would just be like, whoop, this is the guard. And so I had already done that work previously in the planning. So if I needed something, I had that information. And then eventually I got to the point where I was just like, this is probably how many dice I need to roll. So we're going to go with this number. And like you can do it with Dungeons and Dragons and World of Darkness. Like the more comfortable you are with a system, the more you can improvise those stats. So if you're like, oh, I'm struggling with this, give yourself time, get familiar with the system, create some generic, and we'll talk about resources that you can make to, that's a good, an extra one, we'll talk about resources you can make to help yourself improvise. How do I balance between planning my world to the nth degree and having a framework I can improvise in? The combination of players and dice chance make flexible improvisation really necessary. Yeah, a real necessity. So, be right, your question, one of the things that is helpful is to give yourself space to make things up when you're planning a world or a plot. When you're planning these kind of big picture things that you're going to do before you run a game. Is give yourself space. Have things that are not entirely filled in or figure out, because those are the spaces in which you can create something new on the fly if you need it, without it contradicting something you've already made. But it's also a space that your characters can make something. So I've done this in more than one campaign. is that I have created an entire map of a continent, and then I have put like 2 cities on that map. And then the players ask me, like, if the players are like, oh, I want to be from somewhere. So I can be like, well, I have these 2 cities you can pick from, or you can create your own place. Tell me what that place is, and we'll put it on the map. So I've had players do both. A lot of them are like, I don't need to make something up. I'm from this city. But like Skywatch was a good example. I had 2 players pick to be from the city that I'd already created, and 2 players who wanted to create their own part of the world. Leviathan was similar. I had 2 players that wanted to create their own aliens, and the other players all wanted to be humans. So giving yourself holes that you can fill in a world. So I only created 5 of the aliens in Leviathan. I only created 4 of them. One of them is humans. And so I made 4 aliens that I could pull from. So if I ever needed an alien, I'd be like, yes, one of these guys. But then we also decided the galaxy was full of a multitude of aliens. And so there was so much space where I could be like, yes, there's now this alien. Lupin, thank you so much for that Tier 1 subscription. So that's my suggestion for giving yourself that balance between planning and having a framework you can improvise in, is intentionally leave gaps in your planning. Don't create all of your aliens. Don't create all of the cities on a map. Create some of them, but not all of them. On the subject of improvising, what do you do if, say, hypothetically, you're in the middle of a storyline and the focus of that storyline has something come up at the last minute, and someone can't make it to the show? How do I handle that? Well, Noctavita, a lot of different ways. There are so many different options, or several different options that you can do when, nice, when, I'm gonna just put this in front of me. I hope you all understand this is who I am. And also a box of swords and magic. I didn't realize they had the swords and magic.
Sorry, I didn't mean to distract you.
What?
I mean, it was inevitable, but...
Wait, Pride, Prejudice, and Practical Magic's expansion is done?
We just got that in the mail. That's all I know.
I need to go bug them. Match's scarf must be
That's
true.
all I know. Maybe I shouldn't have shown that on camera. I don't know. There's no note.
It's fine. So the dealing with people who can't be there, and this goes both for a show but also for a home game, because sometimes you're like, I've been there. Like, we've scheduled this game. We've had this game scheduled for 3 weeks, and you can't make it. We're still doing it because I don't know when we'll next schedule the other one. Run into this a lot. So there are a few different ways that you can plan around that. The planning around that, there's the very easy one, which is you just control that character. And if the character's not particularly, like, the Oz example was a special one, and I'll talk about that one. But if the character's not, like, massively vital to what's happening in the story, it's maybe not focusing on them, it's not like they're not like having a massive dramatic or narrative moment. You can control the character yourself, especially like often that goes for like good for like you're in the middle of a combat encounter, someone just plays that character and runs through them. That can be the GM, that can be another player at the table. You can do a little bit of like play by committee, so multiple people might take turns playing that particular character. So and the comfort with doing that is somewhat like, how well do you feel like you know that character and the sort of choices they make? You can always ask the player for some guidance. You can write the character out. Sometimes that works, like especially if you're doing very episodic content, there's a reason they are not there that week, and you can discuss with the player what that reason might be. You can knock them unconscious. I've done that a lot. You can kidnap a character. Done that multiple times. But those are all examples of removing a character from the action through different mechanisms. And some of that you'll be inspired by wherever your story's going next, what has just happened in the moment. Like Jade getting knocked unconscious at the beginning of Worlds Beyond. I knew she was going to be out the following week, but that moment sort of happened kind of serendipitously because I knew like she had these bad reactions. She rolled a 1. I knew she was going to be out, so I was like, yeah, we'll make the dramatic thing that she's going to be unconscious, and like Janine will probably be okay with that. They fall through a trap door. They get teleported. So many options. My recommendation, though, if it is a dramatic moment for that character, it's particularly important or salient for a character to be there, don't run that episode. Don't run that session. Create a one-shot that works in the context of what you're doing. And I haven't had to do that very often because it normally isn't that character's like big moment or big week. But for this one, it really was. For this one, it was like, well, Oz, I don't have a good way to write you out of this scene. So let's do something that fits in the context. And in this case, I was actually really lucky. The community, a lot of you were there when I was streaming, and we kind of talked through some different options. Someone threw out, like, what about Quake's team? And I was like, yes! And so Jumping Cactus, I hope you find this helpful. Definitely check out our VOD afterwards, and we have other episodes of the show talking about different parts of playing and running RPGs over on YouTube as well. If anyone wants to catch up on previous episodes. So yeah, I was like, okay, cool. I'm going to just do something completely separate. We came up with a great idea for this, and that was awesome. That was very exciting, and I managed to fit that in as something that was happening concurrently. Was it ideal in terms of storytelling? No. Cutting apart an important episode was maybe not the best thing, but for me, I made the decision that it was better than running it without the character. Teleport. Like Iffy says, genuinely recommend, if you are doing something particularly bad to a character, or even not particularly bad to a character, ask the player for their permission. That's always a good thing to do. And sometimes, like, if I don't know exactly, so, like, I think with Janine for Worlds, I checked in with her afterwards, but I was sort of like, I'm gonna have a few options for how you might not be in the next episode, and are these ones okay with you? Like, I was like, you might be unconscious, or you might go back early. And she was like, both of those are fine with me. And I was like, great. That's how we'll roll with it. So, asking their permission, even if you're not sure, give them a couple of options of things that might happen. Because one, that probably means they won't fight it when it happens, especially if it's like you get teleported and they're like, bullshit, flip the table, how dare you do this to me? You're like, don't you remember you're not here next week? So instead of that scenario happening, they can be prepared for it. They're like, yes, I'm gone. So that is a recommendation. Talk to them about it. You can also get like solid suggestions from them if you're like, you're gonna be gone for a reason, and they can give you some reasons for it. Teleported, but I have this item, and you're like, fuck, I knew you had that item, but I was hoping you would remember that I'm doing this because you're not here next week. So, communication is good. There were a couple of other questions. That popped up. Can you scroll up and chat for me real fast? There were some that were highlighted. I think one more. There we go. What do I do? Cool, got the Noctavita one. How do you know to draw the line between realism and allowing your players to create their own places? Cool, I'll get to that one. So, Bacon and Boris question, which is that kind of line between, how do you define, I'll read the question. How do you know when to draw the line between realism and moving the story along? This is going to be maybe not the best answer or the most helpful one, but it comes down to the tone of your game. How invested in realism is your game setting, as opposed to how non-realistic is your game setting. So I think using the shows here on this channel, Night Witches versus Worlds Beyond. Night Witches is a game set in reality using historical events, maybe not historical characters, but based around things that are very real, very tangible, has happened, and follow all of the logic that we know and associate with how the world works on Earth. Worlds Beyond is about players traveling to alternate dimensions where stories are real. So one of them, in Worlds Beyond, I would make bigger leaps in the narrative. I would improvise around things that are maybe just not quite as realistic, or are the better way I would probably describe it is heightened drama. And more dramatic and a lot more, what's the word that I'm looking for? I think it's dramatic. As opposed to in Night Witches, I would stay grounded in that reality and those moments for a lot longer because that is what the show is. And breaking with that, breaking with the tone and the setting of your game is going to throw things off a lot more. So use how you have decided to play your game, what sort of style of storytelling you have gone for, to direct yourself in making those decisions. Do I think realism or narrative is more important? Yeah, you kind of ask yourself, do you think the realism or the narrative is more important? Worlds Beyond is using the Strange, which is based on Cypher system, so it's by Monty Cook Games. Cypher is the kind of generic system. It's vaguely D20, but it doesn't follow a lot of D20 systems that you're used to, or that you see a lot because it's super different. It just uses a D20. But the Strange is a setting specific to Cypher that basically allows characters to jump between these little pocket dimensions where stories have become reality, and they've created these small little dimensions that the players get to go to and explore. So, for example, last night, the players explored basically the Lara Croft recursion. It was like Lara Croft, Uncharted, Tomb Raider, Uncharted, that kind of like go through the ancient temple, find the artifact, so many traps. But previous to that, they were in the Dr. Frankenstein / Dracula recursion, which we're going to be jumping back to. Speaking of which, actually, for those of you who don't know, a little plug, the Humble Bundle, there is a Humble RPG bundle right now for all of the Numenera books. So I think for like $5, you can get all of the Numenera books, which is Cypher system. It's just a specific setting for it, and I think there might be a higher level where you can also get all of the base text. I feel like Anna is looking this up right now. So if you are interested in looking into Cypher system, that is a great way to get a hold of it, which is real cool. Yeah, I think it's Numenera. It's also a really good deal because it's like all of their PDFs, and I think it's the new ones too. So Anna's popping the link in chat. You want to check that out.
Oops.
$8.
Using the wrong.
OMG ponies. Dropped it in chat. But thanks,
No,
ponies.
No.
It's fine.
I'm not used to that being there, okay?
No, it's cool. I love it. I love it. So check that out if you are interested at all in the system. Oh, cool. So BP Pension says $8 gets you all the core rules and the stuff needed to run Numenera. And Numenera can be, you can backtrack some of it into Cypher. It's also totally compatible with Cypher, which is really cool. So all their settings are compatible with each other, which I have used some of that to my advantage. I have like picked things from different settings. Like the details for Dracula came from the base Cypher book rather than the regular book. Because that was helpful because they didn't have enough vampires in the Strange book, but Cypher had it for me, so I didn't have to make it up for myself. I think it was Twitch something. I don't remember. Someone else asked a question that was asking about how I go about giving the players that space to create things in the world, and what sort of constraints or things do I give to them. I 100% recommend having a I can read the question if it's like a little bit higher, a little more, keep going. There it is. Twitchy Brains question: when allowing your players to create their own places, how do I figure out how much range / detail I allow so that they can still fit into your larger world idea, or is that generally come up, or does that even generally come up as an issue? I do give them constraints. I think that's a very important thing to do. Partially because I don't know if you've ever been told this, but like when you're said, do whatever you want, can be very overwhelming. Can just be too much sometimes, and I think that's a big ask for players. And they don't know necessarily what to do if I don't give them any advice or guidance or constraints. So I do recommend give them some guidelines, and exactly what those guidelines are going to be based off of the thing that they're building. So, like, for example, if I, like Leviathan, which was a space RPG, and like I said, I let players create their own aliens. So with that, there's some mechanics piece. I'm like, cool, because you have to create a focus to be an alien in Stars Without Number. So I said, like, what's the focus that you're going to get from your alien? And like for Claudia's character as Kika, the tiny bat human, it was glide. It's gliding, wings. For Ziana, it was that toughness. So they needed to be able to tell me, like, what's your alien trait, your alien species trait that's going to kind of help you. Hi, mighty expert. But I also would give them, like, some constraints, like, where are they? Like, what's their home planet? How advanced are they in technology? Do they want to be part of ICA, which was this intergalactic alliance, or are they happy not being part of it? And then for that one, I also wanted to know, like, what were some of their core principles? Like, what is important to them? But then in a different setting, right, if I was asking them to create, like, a city on a map or a location or a country, I might be like, how big is it? What's the climate like? What's the city that they're from? What's it called? What type of government do they have? So I give them some guiding questions, and then I'll give them some constraints. So, like, here's the information that I need, and here's some of your constraints. So, like, they are not, they can't be, like, with a city, I might be like, it can't be, like, an evil location, right? They can't be, like, some horrible something or other. Or they can't be in this particular spot on the map. I think I've tended to err on the side of guiding questions, and then if something comes up that seems like a problem with what they've created, I'll say no, or I might offer them some alternatives. But yeah, I think, you know, like you're saying, jumping cactus, like, and Alyssa saying, right, when you're presented with nothing, that's incredibly overwhelming. Having some constraints, having questions to answer is really helpful. And those might not be written down questions. Those might just be, like, a conversation that you have with the character. Gods aren't real and all the powers are granted by demons. I might be like, that may not fit, right? So I definitely suggest when you're coming up with that, give them some constraints, regardless of whether or not you're worried. Give them some things to work with, some questions to answer, and then they might be constraints or they might just be questions for them to answer. But in either case, that will help them and also help you. So you get the information that you need, and they don't maybe go too far away from what you're hoping to do. For some reason I thought I wasn't hosting, but I think I am.
Oh, I saw it come on.
Okay, it looked like on my app, I was like, oh, why isn't it doing the thing? Maybe I haven't reloaded. Who knows? Who knows? So, some other things around improvising. We touched a little bit on improvising, like, stat blocks and what that might look like. Yeah, help them help you, exactly. And improvising stat blocks is going to vary hugely based on your system. I already mentioned, like, it's important that it's sort of based on it'll come out of your familiarity with something. But one of the ways that you can help yourself, one, this can help you become more familiar with the system. But two, this can help you make stuff up on the fly, is prepare yourself for that. Right? This is a weird type of planning because it's not planning for a specific scenario or a specific plot. And this isn't necessarily something that you want to do for a one-shot or a particularly short campaign. But, like, if you are running a long-term campaign that's going to go for multiple weeks or sessions or months or however you want to break it down, create some resources and materials that you can pull from that make your life easier. And I've done this with almost all of my long-term campaigns, to the point, my Shadowrun campaign, Corpsins that I ran, over on the Corpsins Wikia are my sheets that I made as the GM, as resource sheets. I made some for the players, I made some for myself. So I do two things. I almost always make quick reference sheets. So sheets with all of, like, the super basic rules. I'll show you, I'll grab the cipher one real fast. So this sheet right here is everything that the players need to know in order to play Cypher System. Some systems you no, stop setting it on fire, Paladin. Go to Anna's chat, set that on fire. Wait, go to my chat and set it on fire? Someone came in while I was streaming and set my chat on fire.
I'm so proud.
Worst.
It was great.
Now, for a lot of systems, you don't necessarily have to make your own quick reference sheets, or you don't have to make them from scratch. For example, for Shadowrun, you don't need to make it. I made one. Go grab it. It's fine. It's available. For Cypher system, I'll put this somewhere. But this basically covers the DC chart, so like their difficulties, weapons, injuries, recovery rolls, translation, which is specific to the strange, experience points, spending XP. Wow, I even put spending XP on here. Huh. Special rolls and reducing task difficulty. This is pretty much everything that they need to know. Oh, range is over here in order to play Cypher. And the rules are like, these are on the table like all of the time. What, you have a command for it in everything, Anna? Jeez! Like, wow! This text is way larger than the text I did for Shadowrun. Shadowrun's sheet was 2 pages and had tiny, tiny text. I will. Yeah. I will post this. Oh, God, let me figure out a good place to post this. I think it might be part of my GM notes for sure on Patreon. But I think, yeah, we have a wiki. Let me make a PDF, and I'll put this one on the wiki. I have a separate sheet. So I normally have one for the players, or a couple sheets for the players that give them quick rules that they need to know. And then I have a separate sheet for myself as the GM that give me quick rules for specific GM things. Yeah, we can put it in the wiki. I can also post it in the Worlds Beyond Discord. But yeah, we'll get it on the wiki. ! Wiki. We did do an Afterlife episode in Worlds Beyond. It was a lot of fun. And we touched on the tragedy of the Greek afterlife as opposed to them having to deal with it directly. But I'll put this up there. I've done them for Shadowrun. I did one I'm in a Stargate campaign, which is also ridiculous. It's like 3.5. So things that I'll put on there will be like a skill list, basic turn order actions that they can do. No, is it not?
Discord's busted right now, I think.
Oh, Nightbot?
Yeah, that's right now.
That's too bad. So I'll put like the basic things the players need to know, and then I'll also make a separate sheet that includes like basic things that I need to know as the GM, that the players don't necessarily need to know. Sometimes. I don't always need that. Huh. Fascinating.
I went down. It'll be back.
And then one of the other things that I'll do, so that helps me improvise things on the fly. Like, for example, with Cypher System, because so much of it just comes down to the players say they want to do something and I decide how difficult it is. That table is the most referenced thing of like, this is how hard it is. And I look at that table and I decide how difficult it is. Thank you, Iffy, for posting it there. The best way to make reference sheets is the use of a lot of tables and text boxes in Word. So you can very efficiently tessellate things based on the size of the boxes that you have in the tables that you're using. Even if the tables are invisible, a lot of mine are in tables. So that helps you do a lot of that kind of like solving problems when the players ask to do something on the fly. You can be like, oh, here's the difficulty of it because I have that information. But related to that is creating or writing down information about various types of challenges that they might be facing. And this might be, there's the upfront piece that I definitely recommend doing before any long-term game, which is creating your sort of reference sheets for things like monsters or NPCs that they might face. Or, as someone brought up earlier, perhaps you just need a sheet with different names on it because you're real bad at that. You might also want to create a sheet with, so for example, my Shadowrun sheet, I had, one of the things that I had to frequently reference was how strong are various walls and doors? Because I had a player who's largely solved problems of walls and doors through breaking them. So I needed to know the structural integrity of a lot of those things to quickly reference them. I also had you want to tailor what you had. You want to tailor what you have about what you have as your reference sheets based on the type of system. So in Cypher, like I demonstrated earlier, monsters are real easy to make. So I don't need to have a quick reference sheet of default monsters. In contrast, in Shadowrun, I had a sheet which gave me basic stat blocks for various levels of enemies, like easy guard, medium guard, difficult guard, easy mage, medium mage, difficult mage. One set for each type of spirit. And so I could literally be like, cool, there's a bunch of guards. They're medium guards. Here's their stat block. The other one would be, but in Shadowrun, one of the ways characters get differentiated is their weapons. So I have one set of blocks that was the character's basic stats. And then the other block that was like, here's just a bunch of different weapons. Here's like the katana and this, like 2 pistols and 2 of these things. So I have like an equipment sheet for any games where switching out weapons is a common thing, where like the weapon stats is an important number to know. And so I can have, essentially have all of that information really quickly at hand, so I can plug and play. I can be like, this stat block, this weapon, bam, they're done. That's my NPC. Windows are a structural weakness in space. The 2 NPCs that I made, and this is why I'm really bad at it, and when they finally got me a sheet, is I was like, Natalie. And then I went through Natalie Dormer in my head, and I was like, no, that's a famous person named Portman, Natalie Portman. Fuck. And then I repeated that with Emma Thompson. So Natalie Portman and Emma Thompson were 2 NPCs that I created, realizing that they were famous people's names after the fact. You would have loved if a door hit back. I mean, sometimes stuff electrocuted them. So yeah, the creating yourself reference sheets are a really helpful way to be prepared to improvise during play. Because rather than being like, this also helps you be a little less precious about when players maybe go places you don't expect or do things you weren't planning for. Because instead of being like, but my carefully crafted NPCs, I put so much work into them, you're like, whatever, stat blocks. Randomized ones, or like the previously created ones. So you don't have to like spend as that's a delightful use of those emotes, Iffy. Oh no. You don't have to worry as much about people kind of going in different directions. That's true. We can put famous people in our, it's just a famous people recursion. It's right next to the Bad Babies one. So that's something that I recommend as a way to help you improvise, is do stuff up front. That will get you there. Stat blocks, quick reference sheets are really great ways of doing it. And thinking about the types of challenges they face will help you figure out what you should put on those different sheets. And they can be living documents too. You can add stuff to them. You can be like, boy, because I'm not sure I put the structural rating of stuff on my very first sheet that I made. And so eventually I was like, nope, I need this on here, because this is what this character always does. Get out, Pumpkin. Well done. And so that will help you with improvising, is pre-planning. This is also something that relates to a middle ground of sort of planning that you can do with a session. You can come up with like a couple of different monsters or NPCs or traps or something that the players might face without necessarily having them placed on a specific map. And you can randomize it. You can literally even say, I'm going to roll to see what they encounter, or you can just go down your list and be like, cool, check that off. Which is what I ended up doing last night, because I was like, I had enough time to write down a list of ideas of traps that you normally encounter in Lara Croft / Indiana Jones type of temples. I was like, okay, classic traps: spikes, spike pit, abyss pit, falling floors, giant boulders, bugs, snakes. Like, and I just wrote these things down, and I was like, here's just a list of them. And like things on doors is like gas traps, door puzzles. And so I just wrote a bunch of them down and kind of looked at the list every time they entered into a room, and I was like, which one of these is in this room now? And so that was a way that I could easily kind of, deadly neurotoxin. I could sort of start progressing them through without having to intricately plan exactly where every trap and potential hazard inside the dungeon is. The boulder was, it was a good moment, and that I definitely enjoyed. So you can also set yourself up for kind of a middle ground between planning something and improvising something by having like modules, having little nodes that the players might encounter without them necessarily being set out in a specific order or intended to happen at a specific time or in response to something in particular. And I think that's a nice middle ground between doing a lot of planning and doing a lot of improvising, is creating things that you can refer to. And because here's the thing about, I don't know how many of you have seen improv shows. Improv shows rarely just start from nothing. They have a little bit of a structure that they're working around, some sort of rules that the game or the show follows, and then you get suggestions. So you have a list of things to pull from, and then you start feeding off of each other. So think of it as your suggestion list of things that you're going to look at during the course of the episode. So a lot of the time I will write down challenges of, here are potential complications that the players might encounter, and then I can make a decision when the players do something. Is this a moment for them to encounter this complication? Like, did they fail a roll? Cool, they're going to encounter this complication. Did they succeed? Then that complication doesn't happen. Jungle mace, as opposed to the desert mace. And so that's... and you would want to take that scarab back with you. It's just a lot of stuff. Pocket sand. So that's giving yourself suggestions and prompts to pull from while still leaving things undecided is a good way to balance the decisions that the characters make with having things to come up with without having to make everything up on the spot. So even when it feels like I am heavily improvising something, I have things to pull from. A lot of my planning is writing down potential complications or ideas or broad concepts that they might encounter. Jungle mace. It's just like a big stick with a stone on the end of it. I don't understand why it's so complicated for you. It's a jungle mace. What? A jungle mace is just a machete. No, Paladin. One of those is a cutting instrument, and the other one is for blunt force. Jeez.
It's a jungle sword, obviously.
I was gonna say it's a jungle sledgehammer. A machete is a jungle sword.
Yeah,
Oh, okay. Yeah. Sorry. Oh, there we go. Yes, in answer, the character who destroyed a lot of doors was Cromwell Esquire. Magnuson Cromwell Esquire, the butler. It's a blunt machete, so it's a branch. Yes, it is. I feel like, I don't know why you're struggling with this so much, Iffy. It's a branch and a rock. But don't confuse that with the forest mace, which is also a branch and a rock, but it's a deciduous wood as opposed to a jungle hardwood with like a igneous rock versus a metamorphic rock? I'm gonna throw out some rock words and assume that they might be correct. Yeah, there were some wonderful moments with Cromwell's character. Okay, so stuff we've talked about in terms of improvising. Does anyone have other questions specifically related to improvising? Feel free to ask me about other things last night. I really did improvise almost the entirety of a jungle. I use a dungeon generator a lot whenever I need a dungeon. And so I found a dungeon generator, and then I copied that out, and then I wrote down a list of possible things that they might encounter. And I decided, and then as we went, they basically went into each room one at a time, and I decided whether or not, I was like, oh, cool, this room has 2 doors in it. Are any of the doors secret doors? What's the trap in this room? What's the problem? And I was like, cool, this one. This room is a puzzle. I improvise the puzzles, for better or for worse. If my favorite style as a GM is my favorite style to play under. Probably, because I think as a player it gives me the most flexibility to make choices. If something, and I guess maybe this is, someone also asked about modules. Why do you have metamorphic rocks in the jungle? Because there used to be volcanoes, and the volcanoes led to particularly fertile ground, and then they used to be like underwater, and then that pressure, and I don't know what type of rock is under most jungles. Metamorphic rock is old, okay? I'm also I'll touch on, hi, Imp in my head, thanks so much for that resub. Modules versus not modules, and or modules and improvisation. As a player, I like to be able to make choices in a moment and not have to worry necessarily about finding like the perfect or optimal solution. As someone who has played in modules, they do tend to allow for less improvisation. You can have some, but they tend to allow for less because they kind of have predetermined narrative beats that you need to get to, and like specific solutions to a puzzle that you might need to figure out, or just the monster needs to die. And so in those situations, it's just sort of going through like, here's the thing that I'm supposed to do, as opposed to what would my character do in this situation. And I think that's kind of the, you were on your way to Old Blighty? Well, that's lovely. That's kind of the sort of the flip side. Like, I think as a player, I prefer GMs who tend to lead a little bit more towards improvisation in their structure, but I don't require it. Like, a lot of it for me is more about who the players are who I'm playing with and how much fun we have as a group. Like, how much opportunity do I just have for us to interact as characters? That's one of my favorite parts. I really like doing that. So that's why I tend to give a lot of space for my characters to just interact with each other. Ooh, railroading. That is an excellent question. Talking about building a one-shot with plot and without railroading. That's somewhat related, but let's talk about really fast modules. When you have something that's pre-planned, a lot of it's going to depend on the module, because some modules plan a lot more than other modules do. And modules are often, they're difficult, right? Because you're more so than just a GM planning for a session. Like, you're truly writing a completed story with a beginning, a middle, and an end in a lot of modules without any characters. And so you have to account for potential differences in how the characters want to do stuff. And so, like, you have to be like, how is this begin and middle and end without the characters being there? I'm not going to know what type of characters. Maybe they're going to be a group of, like, bards. Like, you're going to have 4 bards because they're a band, and that's just who they are. And
Turtles.
Or turtles, right? Like,
Turtle bards.
Turtle bards.
Traveling through. Sorry.
What if that just happens to be the group? What's their buy-in going to be, as opposed to, like, a more classic paladin and rogue and something and druid and a wizard. What is D&D? So how do you accommodate for all of those groups? And different modules do it in different ways. So the modules that I have played tended to have sort of specific beats that characters needed to do. And I felt like the ones that tend to work pretty well is like modules that might have travel time or like sort of hex crawls, right? Because you have players moving from point A to point B, and you can fill in a lot of the things there. The ability to improvise really does come down, or the improvising with a module sometimes comes down to how reverent do you hold the full structure of the module. And the more you want to say, I'm going to follow the module and everything that's in it, the less that you'll have to improvise, and the more you'll need to figure out how to motivate your players to follow through with things, which we can talk about. But if you are less sacred to it and you're like, I want to hit the broad strokes, or the module is is a suggestion for me, then you can give yourself more space to improvise within. But for example, like I know with Dragon Heist, which is one of the campaigns that I'm in right now, it's based off of the Dragon Heist module. And I think at the end of like one of the chapters, like we were following through and then just a thing happened that we didn't do. Like we failed, or we didn't fail, but like we didn't succeed at something. We were supposed to hold on to an item and we didn't. And so because of that, both our GM and us had to figure out like, well, how do we still get to the end game without having the thing that's supposed to get us there? And so we have to do a lot of different workaround. And that's where it became like, let us figure out some potential solutions and the GM can decide whether or not they're going to work. So I think it comes down to how intently you want to like force the players, because he could have also somehow like railroaded us into getting that thing back, or maybe not railroaded. I don't necessarily like that term because I feel like it suggests that GMs getting players to do what they want is bad. And that's not inherently bad necessarily. Prepubescent polymorphed minstrel turtles. Wouldn't they be prepubescent polymorphed monk turtles? Like, wouldn't that be the equivalent?
That was the earlier
Yeah.
joke. Willow here said young polymorphed monk turtles.
Yeah. I like them being, I mean, I guess they're pubescent, not prepubescent. Pubescent polymorphed, because it has a nice alliteration there. So with modules, there's a lot of variation, and again, it comes down to it. Like, I am playing modules on a channel that is like, the reason we're playing it is to like show off the module, so we're going to adhere much more closely to the structure of the module as is written than you are required to in a home game. And then like the home game, I remember reading through the module and being like, cool, I like this part, and this part. So I picked the beginning section, I picked some of the enemies, I was like, I like the end, this is fun. And then I pulled some of the things from the middle that would get them there. But then I made up a lot of how they got from point A to point B. And I was like, here are some of the issues that they're going to run into on the way. And so that kind of whole middle section became much more improvised. So it's worth, like, modules are worth just deciding up front how much you want to use it, the way it's structured. Or even as you go, as you use it. What is D&D? We just don't know. Think of the module. Yeah, it's like a buffet. You don't have to eat everything there, and if you overfill your plate, it might make you too full. Yeah, pick the dumb stuff, ignore the, pick the stuff you like, ignore the stuff you don't like, and as needed, tweak the narrative for it to make sense. And that's 100%. I think the module that I ran, I was doing a D&D Adventure League, and it was like the Escape from the Abyss module, which is the one down in the, Underdark. It's like, it took me a while to get that word.
Like, abyss?
Not in the Abyss,
No.
the Underdark. In the Underdark. And, like, the setup was, you're enslaved in this camp and you escape, and the conclusion is there's a giant, because it was leading into the one of the major modules, and it was like, there's this big old monster that you have to fight. And you just had to find a reason for them to want to get to this city to end up in that fight, and they were going, and it was like, they're going to be hunted on the way, and I'm like, cool, all I got to do is give them the right motivations to get them to this city, and then I can pull these pieces of like random encounters and them getting hunted and characters that they might meet and the NPCs that they're with. It's like, but personal challenge, don't eat beforehand to get your money's worth. Right, yeah, just buy a module, don't play any RPGs for like a month before you run the module, and then just marathon it. Don't fill up on bread before you play your RPG. Yeah, these are all important. So yeah, pick modules you're interested in, pull the stuff out that works for you. You don't have to do all of it. Like, they wrote these modules to help players that didn't or like to help people who didn't know what else to do, or didn't have another idea, or just want to have something presented to them, but also as inspiration for those who have more planning or more stuff. Hi, Trooper, we're being raided. You know what that means. Let's make it gay. You're welcome. Hi, hello, welcome in, Raiders. It's lovely to see you if you're just joining us. My name's Random Tuesday. I am the GM of Worlds Beyond over here, and we're talking about giving advice on improvising in running tabletop RPGs, how and when to do it. For those of you who don't know Trooper, Trooper is our GM of Night Witches on this channel, which is at 3 p.m. on Saturdays. Worlds Beyond is at 7 p.m. on Wednesdays. You should watch most of those shows. You should go give Trooper a follow. 24-hour fast and then feast. So we've touched on a lot of different things. We touched on planning to help you improvise. We've touched on modules and improvising, making space, giving yourself space when you're planning in order to make stuff up as you go. We talked about a few different things. Some of my personal preferences in improvising. There was like a thing that I was going to bring up. We've got about 15 minutes left before we're going to transition over to Wind Down with a chat with myself and Miss Anna Geeks. Oh, sweet. Jumping Cactus. Definitely talk to Trooper about GURPS.
Mrs. I got married.
You got Mrs. That's right. Mrs. Anna Geeks. I was like, what?
It's weird. But
You got Mrs.ified.
Yeah.
Escape from the Abyss and it not being set in the Abyss is kind of an oversight. Maybe it wasn't Escape from the Abyss, but it was, I don't even remember. It was Into the Abyss, not Escape from the Abyss. Right. It was an Adventure League one. Talking about how to writing a one-shot, or kind of in general, how do you get players to plot without wanting them to be railroaded? And the term railroading, like I want to kind of break it down for a minute, which is Ms.
You picked the randomest things to reply to.
I just
MS period is Ms.
yeah, Ms. Yeah, I see what it is. I just like it has
it's
this
Ms. Marvel, not Miss Marvel. Ms.
Marvel. Ms. I enjoyed there was somewhere, and it was like on an application or something that I filled out that actually had an X as an option.
Oh.
I like that. Mix. Okay, sorry. Got distracted. I was gonna say, railroading is a term we like to use. And it is a thing that people do, right? But it tends to we tend to paint, I think we tend to paint this picture of railroading is anytime the GM gets the players to do what they want, like I have railroaded into that. I haven't let them make their choices. And it's bad if I ever try and get them to do the thing that I want. And I don't think everyone thinks that way, but there sometimes feels like this is just like, you have to let them do. And maybe it's a little bit of a reaction to, I've had some conversations about like why I think it might be okay to have GMs sometimes, but there's definitely a reaction in some tabletop communities of like, GM-less everything, just do whatever you want. And I'm like, that's cool, but not the only thing, right? Because if we do that, I'm out of a job. But yeah, exactly. Players are enjoying themselves. No one calls it railroading. They call it a roller coaster of fun. I mean, I don't know if they call it that, but you don't call it railroading if you're enjoying when the GM's getting you to do what they want. You're like, yes, thank you for this guidance, for the suggestions, because as we have discussed earlier, having no constraints is very overwhelming. So there are a few different things that you can do when it comes down to the how to get players to do what you want. All of my techniques can boil down to you want to make the thing you want them to do look the best. Whatever that might mean. Look the most interesting, the most appealing, have the least consequences, the most fun, the most reward, like whatever it is, you want to somehow make the thing you want them to do seem like the best choice to make. And sometimes that might be the illusion of giving them a choice. They have a choice. But what you do is you're like, this option and this option, right? And don't heavy-hand it. Like, be prepared. If you're giving them two options, they might pick the one that you didn't want them to do. But giving them options is important. Or if it's relevant, like you can give them options that might lead them in a few different directions. Like you could go follow this character, or you could go do this thing. And so they die from psychic damage if they don't do the thing. Maybe that's an option, or not. Book here. Maybe not the best. Players latch onto a nothing detail, like a chair. Is there a chair that players have latched onto? to hand over their weapons at the gate in the Rich Court, and they decided trying to kill the guards instead of handing over their weapons like everyone else was the right choice. That will happen. Like, to be clear, these are strategies, not foolproof techniques that will prevent your players from doing things you don't want them to do. You can't do that. They're people. If you don't want them to do that, do anything you don't want them to do. If you aren't okay with them doing things you don't want them to do, whatever, then play something like The Sims, right, where you have complete control over their choices. But one of the things that you can really do, there's a chair in last week's Good Roll, it happens, is tempt them, like make that the option that seems appealing or good to them, whatever that option may be. So it might be, and that comes down to knowing the motivations for your individual characters. If they are a thief, maybe they want to steal stuff. If they are a mechanic, maybe they will want to fix things. And so you pepper in those temptations, and it might be both a carrot and a stick approach. You're like, this option has bad consequences. This one has maybe consequences, but good choices. So you kind of lead them in the direction of what seems like a good idea. Alternatively, sometimes you don't give them a choice. Sometimes you present to them like, so-and-so comes to you with a job, you've accepted this job, and the first thing you should do is go talk to this person. You tell them what it is they should do to solve their problem, rather than having them sit there and muddle and debate about what the best solution to their problem is. Like, you can sometimes just give them the answer, because is it important for them to figure out how to find the solution, or is it more important for them to jump to that step? Like, if they have to break in somewhere and one of the things you want them to do is talk to a person, like up front, have their employer be like, you should go talk to John. John's got all the information for you. So then they'll probably go talk to John. You've told them what to do. Fryzerburn, thank you so much for that subscription. So you can give them choices, make the one you want them to do look really appealing. You can sometimes just present them the next course of action in a way that they don't have to really make decisions about it. It's not necessarily positive or negative. It's just a clear next step. And in relation to how about when people like focus on things that aren't super important, be cognizant of when you describe things. We as people are like focus in on salient detail. Like, media encourages us to do this all the time. Like, the camera will pan over to a cup at the table and you're like, that cup's important, it's gonna come up later. Or, you know, something will be a different color than everything else in the room. So if you describe things with salient details in like very specific ways, your players will probably latch on to that. Sometimes you can also accept, like, players get really into their, like, this thing seems super important. You're like, cool, you touch it. Don't even get them to roll. Just be like, you pick it up. Nothing happens. You just, like, remind them in character that the thing is not actually important to them. But yeah, Chekhov's cup, right? So be mindful of the things and the way you describe things when you present them. You can sometimes use that to your advantage. You can describe multiple things in a room. Some of them are important. Some of them are traps. Some of them are the thing that they want. And so you can make multiple things seem interesting so they interact with all of them. Or you have a rock. That's it. It's a rock, right? Or you describe things more generically or like more in a wash. You sort of are painting the picture of an overall space. So instead of saying there's a single open book on the table, you might be like, there are piles of books on the tables and more on the walls. And so you're painting this picture of like what's important in this space more generically, as opposed to like drawing attention to a specific detail. So using your descriptions of a location is a really good way to kind of help players focus in on what is or is not important, but be cognizant when you do describe things, because players may latch onto stuff that you don't think was important. And it is okay to tell them both in character and out of character that thing is not important, so that they let it go. No, this rock has a name and now it is my precious pet, right? That's, alternatively, they latch onto it and then it can just become part of it and it becomes important. Like, if a player gets super excited, I see what both of you are doing and you both need to stop. If a player gets super excited about it, you can then let that become part of your story or campaign. Now suddenly, like, this is a big deal, or this is an important NPC. Like these, a good example, there was a character in Leviathan who was this kind of like annoying, skeezy green shark based alien that they just like latched onto. They had this really intense interaction with that I never anticipated. And I was like, cool, he's gonna come back. He is now an important NPC as opposed to an unimportant NPC who he was beforehand. It's a rock of distraction. When you're hidden, toss the rock. Nearby NPC may hear it and go investigate. Requires attunement. As you come to village, there's a single cow in the field, right? That sounds suspicious. There is a field full of cows. Way less suspicious. So be cognizant of how you choose to describe things, because your descriptions may direct your player's attention and focus to what's happening in a moment, to the sounds, to the sights, to the colors, to whatever is important in the room. And that's something that I recommend. You can also use your roles to help them. Like sometimes if players are getting stuck and like they can't figure out a solution or where to go next or what to do next or how to solve the puzzle or how to talk to this person, like whatever it is, whether this person is lying or blah, 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 ask them to make a roll and then give them information based off of that. So like particular example I will say is sometimes like an 18 intelligence character is probably going to solve a puzzle better than one of my players. I don't know why I was going to give one of my players an intelligence stat. So asking that player to roll for their character, then I can be like, your character figures out the solution to this problem that you were stuck on. Because one of the things that I think is really important to remember is that players are two people. They are playing them. They are living themselves and they are playing their character. The character is only one person. So asking the player to remember two full people's lives and experiences and be able to think cognitively for two separate people is a big ask. And probably, and I think an unfair ask. So use the system, use the roles, use the mechanics to help alleviate the burden of being two people off of the player. Help them. Like a good example is you don't ask your players to actually physically break down a door when their character's doing that in reality. So you don't have to physically ask them to solve a puzzle when their character is doing it, right? It's not a LARP. And even in a LARP, you wouldn't have to physically break down the door because you're playing a character who can do things you can't do. And asking them to remember everything your character has encountered is, I think, problematic. Yeah, sorry, I can't break down the doors. Yeah, GM is like 5 people and 20 people. So, asking them to remember every detail about every conversation they've ever had with anyone is like not okay. And like, sure, it's nice if they make notes, but they might forget. Secretly the cow is lord of a milk and cheese hell dimension. Yes. Wait, but if it's a hell dimension, does that mean it's bad milk and cheese? Or just milk and cheese I can never have? Imps, yeah. Suggestion. You don't have to name every NPC. You don't have to. Sometimes they can just be the guard. Because people will latch onto named characters way more than they latch onto unnamed characters. So I will intentionally leave characters as seemingly unimportant. And the players will ask if they really care. They'll ask what the name is. Hell cheese is cheese whiz and Velveeta. Oh, that's the worst. Oh, or it's just you go to this dimension and you become lactose intolerant. All right, so we've got about 5 minutes left. So any last quick questions related to improvising, to running RPGs? This is our last behind the screens for now, at least. It might come back another time. This show's like a periodic thing. Maybe we'll do like a once a month something or other, because I feel like that's a good time of span between episodes, because you can't use speak with dead, but you can use steak with dead. I tried to get a cow pun in there, but it didn't quite work. I was gonna say squeak with dead, but that was, I feel like, a bit of a reach. Because
steak with dead does make sense.
Mm-hmm.
It's dead, and you can make steak with it.
Yeah, steak with dead. I do like putting doors in front of players. Yeah, and then sometimes they'll ask for your backstory, and that's when you just make stuff up. That's when like you go into your actual like improv classes where people are like, "What's your backstory?" And you're like, "Oh, well, let me tell you the story of my life." For me, I always use like contrast in that. So I'm like, what type of character have we not encountered yet and had like an meaningful interaction with? So I'm like, all right, sure, this one. And that's the type of person that it is. The material component is A1 steak sauce. Vampire cows. A few more minutes. If there's any other questions. And then we will switch over to Wind Down. And we will talk about our changes to how we are going to be doing some fundraising and other structural changes related to Geek Space TV. That was a burp, and I'm very sorry. So tell me a character, and welcome an earnest. Okay, the other thing, though, about improv that I had to unlearn is that in a lot of improv, one of the first things that they teach you is, like, don't ask questions, because then you're putting the onus on someone else to come up with the information, and I seriously had to unlearn that as a GM, because that's actually one of the most important things that you can do is asking questions of your players. Ask them, what did they do? Ask them how their character looks, how they act, how they behave, what they're thinking. So, I asked one a while ago about improvising when your plan unexpectedly crosses a line. That really depends on the intensity of the line that you crossed. That's where, like, if you do an okay, right, you come up with something, you do an okay check, and the player's like, I'm not okay, or they might X card something. If you're not sure what to do in a moment, my biggest suggestion would be to take a break, to step away from the table, and come back to it in a few minutes. Maybe talk out of character with the person if they're willing to explain, like, what they did, but give yourself some time to think about it. And come up with a new idea. Like, you don't have to immediately solve that in the moment if you don't have an easy fix for it. It's okay to need to step away and to think about it. And I think that's an important reminder that if you improvise something and it crosses a line, which I have done, I've said things and the player's like, no, X card, and I wasn't sure what to do, then I would have said, okay, we'll take a break. And that might be come back to the game, or maybe just come back to that character, that scene. You can always say, hey, okay, I'm going to pause here, and we're going to go look at these two characters and the conversation that they're having, so I can think about something else. A door mimic the entire story of a door. A dory? No? No? Just me? No? Okay, it's fine. I'll get out. I'll leave.
You must find the Emperor a new door for his bedchambers. We'll call it Finding Door.
So it's just an entire quest about making and building a door.
Yeah.
Sweet, thank you, Jer. It's adorable. Is it a sentient door, or is it just the story of a door? This is the story of a door. No? Alright, cool. Well, on that note, I think that's probably a good place for us to wrap up. We're going to very quickly transition over from this to Wind Down. I'm going to return and then come back. I will be chilling for this Wind Down so we can both talk, but Anna will probably be starting. Yeah, cool. Shall we? We'll see you in a few minutes. No? A minute? Alright.